Hey everyone, welcome back. Ready for another deep dive. Today we're taking a look at The Power of Ignored Skills by Manoj Tripathi.
It's a really cool book, Like, it makes you think about all these abilities we have that we kind of just take for granted.
Right. And Tripathi uses all these short stories, over 50 of them, to show how much these skills actually matter in our lives.
Yeah. And they're not like your typical business skills or anything. He talks about observation, connecting the dots, even dreams.
Okay, so let's start with chapter 1, The Power of Observation. It seems pretty basic, right? Like, of course we need to observe things.
Yeah, but it's more than just seeing. It's about really paying attention, noticing the details, and then figuring out what it all
He
means.
uses that story about Newton and the apple, which, okay, everyone's heard it before, but what was Newton actually seeing that other people weren't?
That's the question, right? It's like he was looking at the same thing, but he was observing it differently. He was curious and he asked questions, and that led him to this huge discovery about gravity.
So it's not enough to just see things. We have to actively engage with them, ask questions, be curious.
Exactly. And Tripathi has this great example from Hindu mythology. There's this sage, Narad Muni, who's like super devout, chanting all the time, but he gets told that this simple farmer is actually Lord Vishnu's biggest devotee.
Oh, interesting. So Narad Muni is kind of confused, right? Because he thinks he's the most devoting.
Totally. So he goes to observe this farmer, and the farmer isn't chanting or anything special. He's just living his life, working his fields, taking care of his family.
Okay, but I'm sensing there's a twist coming.
Right. So a huge storm hits, and Nard Muni is like freaking out, trying to save this one lamp from going out. But the farmer, he just stays calm and keeps working. It's that difference that shows who's truly devoted. The farmer's actions speak louder than Narad Muni's words.
Whoa. Okay, that's a powerful point. Sometimes the most important things are hidden in plain sight, and we just need to learn to really see them.
And that ties into the next chapter, the power of connecting the dots. Once we've observed all these details, we need to figure out how they fit together.
So it's like putting together a puzzle, right? Finding the connections between things that might seem totally random.
Yeah, and he uses this example about how Bombay became this huge business hub. At first, it seems totally unrelated, but
Yeah. When I saw that in the table of contents, I was like, what does that have to do with anything?
exactly.
Yeah.
But he shows how, like, the opening of the Suez Canal led to the growth of cotton mills in India, which brought in all these traders, and boom, Bombay is transformed.
So it's about seeing those chain reactions, understanding how one event can trigger another, and lead to these huge changes.
Totally. And it's not just about the good stuff. We also have to think about the unintended
Like the
consequences.
Cobra effect, right? Where the British government tried to get rid of cobras by offering a reward for every dead one.
And of course, people started breeding cobras just to get the money. When they realized their mistake and stopped the rewards, all those extra cobras got
It's
released.
like my spam filter. I
Yeah.
block one sender and 5 more pop up. My own personal Cobra effect.
That's such a good example. It shows how even our everyday actions can have these ripple effects. Tripathi's point is that we need to think about those potential consequences before we make decisions.
Okay, on to chapter 3, the power of communication.
Hmm.
I mean, this seems pretty obvious, right? We all communicate all the time.
Right, but Tripathi reminds us that it's about way more than just talking. It's about connecting with people, inspiring them, getting your message across in a way that really resonates.
And get this, 93% of communication is nonverbal. That blew my mind.
Right, it's your tone of voice, your body language, all that stuff. It makes a huge difference in how people receive your message.
Think about, like, Churchill's speeches during the war, or Roosevelt's fireside chats during the Depression. Those guys were masters of communication.
They knew how to use their words to connect with people on an emotional level, to inspire them, to get them to act.
Okay, but what about us regular folks? How can we become better communicators?
Tripathi talks about like really understanding your audience, knowing what you want to say, and then being mindful of how you deliver it. It's about making sure your words, your tone, your body language, everything is aligned.
It's like, it's not just what you say, but how you say it.
Right. Totally. Imagine you're pitching an idea to your boss. You could have the best idea in the world, but if you don't communicate it well, it might not get the attention it deserves.
Oh, I've definitely been there.
You
Like,
know,
I know I have a good idea, but I just can't articulate it in a way that gets people excited.
it happens to all of us. But the good news is communication is a skill and we can all get better at it with practice.
Now, this next chapter, The Power of Purpose, this one really hit home for me. It's about having that clear why. that drives you, that fuels your passion.
Purpose is what gives meaning to our actions. It's what helps us overcome challenges and achieve great things.
And it's not just for individuals, right? Companies are realizing that having a strong sense of purpose is key to success.
Absolutely. When employees can connect their work to a larger purpose, they're more engaged, more productive, and more likely to stick around.
It's like that famous story about Steve Jobs recruiting John Scully to Apple. Jobs asked him, "Do you want to sell sugared water for the rest of your life? Or do you want to come with me and change the world?"
That question, appealing to Scully's sense of purpose, was all it took.
So purpose is like a superpower, right? It gives us the motivation and the resilience to achieve our goals.
And that leads perfectly into the next chapter, the power of dreams.
Okay, now this is where things get really interesting.
Yeah.
We all have dreams, but how do we actually make them happen?
That's the key question, right? It's one thing to dream, but it takes courage and action to turn those dreams into reality.
Think about Martin Luther King Jr. His dream of racial equality wasn't just a wish. It fueled a movement and changed history.
Exactly. His I Have a Dream speech is a testament to the power of dreams to inspire and create positive change.
And then there's Walt Disney. He literally built a magical world from a dream. Despite all the challenges, he believed in his vision and made it happen.
Disney once said, "If you can dream it, you can do it." And that's so true. Believing in our dreams is the first step towards achieving them.
But let's be real, dreams don't always come true, right? What happens when we hit those roadblocks?
That's where the power of out-of-the-box thinking comes in.
Chapter 6. This is about challenging assumptions, thinking creatively, finding solutions that others might miss.
It's about looking at things from a new perspective, questioning the way things have always been done.
Like the Fosbury flop in high jump. Dick Fosbury revolutionized the sport by jumping backward over the bar. Everyone thought he was crazy, but it worked.
It's such a great example of how thinking differently can lead to breakthroughs.
And it's not just about those big revolutionary ideas, it's about finding creative solutions to everyday problems no matter what you do.
Totally. And speaking of problem solving, we can't forget the power of perseverance.
Chapter 7. This is all about grit, determination, that unwavering belief in yourself even when things get tough.
Because let's be honest, success is rarely a straight line. There are always going to be obstacles and setbacks along the way.
Tripathi has these amazing stories about perseverance, like that one-armed Olympian, Carolee Takacs, who won gold after losing his dominant hand.
It's incredible, right? And then there's Thomas Edison, the king of perseverance. He said, "I have not failed. I've just found 10,000 ways that won't work."
Such a great way to look at failure, right? It's not about avoiding it, it's about learning from it.
And Abraham Lincoln, too. He faced so many challenges in his life, but he just kept going, and he led the nation through one of its most difficult times.
These stories remind us that success isn't about luck or talent alone. It's about that unwavering commitment to your goals.
And sometimes that commitment requires us to take a deep dive, which is the focus of Chapter 8.
This one's all about going beyond the surface level, really exploring the nuances, getting a deeper understanding.
It's about being curious, asking tough questions, and really digging deep to find those hidden insights.
Like, Tripathi tackles some fascinating questions. For example, why are diamonds more expensive than water when water is essential for life?
He uses this thing called the law of diminishing marginal utility. Basically, the more readily available something is, the less we value it. Water is abundant, diamonds are scarce, so.
Okay, I see. He also goes into how cooking food, like with fire, might have actually played a role in human evolution.
Right. Cooked food is easier to digest, which freed up energy for our brains to grow and develop.
It's crazy to think that something as simple as cooking could have such a huge impact on our species.
And he doesn't shy away from complex issues either. Like, he takes a deep dive into the challenges facing Indian agriculture, which is a really complicated topic.
It shows how important it is to really dig deep, to understand the complexities of an issue before trying to solve it. Okay, before we move on, let's talk about the power of prediction. This one always makes me a little skeptical. Like, isn't the future supposed to be unknown?
I get it. But Tripathi's point is that prediction isn't about, like, knowing the future for sure. It's about using what we know about the past and the present to make educated guesses about what might happen next.
So, like chess players, right? They try to anticipate their opponent's moves. Or weather forecasters, they analyze data to predict what the weather will be like.
Exactly. Of course, predictions aren't always right, but the point is to be aware of the trends, to be thinking ahead.
So it's more about being prepared and adaptable, right?
Totally, because the world is constantly changing, and being able to anticipate those changes can give you a huge advantage.
This has been an incredible dive into the first 9 chapters of The Power of Ignored Skills. We've covered so much, but there's still more to come.
Stay tuned for part 2, where we'll explore even more fascinating insights from the book.
All right, we're back and ready to keep digging into the power of ignored skills.
You know, it's funny because we talk a lot about how technology changes everything, but I think it's more about human skills and technology working together.
Absolutely. We create the technology, we adapt to it, and we find new ways to use it. It's a constant evolution.
And as technology evolves, so does the job market.
Right, it's that creative destruction thing. Some jobs become obsolete as new ones emerge. It's a cycle we've seen throughout history.
Like during the Industrial Revolution, right?
Yeah?
Machines replaced a lot of manual labor, but then new industries popped up and people found new ways to make a living.
Exactly. And it's happening again now with AI, robotics, automation, all that stuff.
Makes you wonder, though, are we headed for a future where robots take all the jobs?
Well, Tripathi doesn't think so. He believes that while some jobs will disappear, new ones will be created, just like in the past.
So it's not about being afraid of technology. It's about adapting, learning new skills, and being prepared for the future. Exactly. Lifelong learning is key. We need to be constantly upskilling and reskilling to stay ahead of the curve.
Okay, let's get back to some of those stories from the book. There's one about a toothpaste factory that was having trouble with empty boxes getting shipped out.
Oh, yeah, this one's great. They brought in a fancy engineering firm to solve the problem.
And I bet it cost a fortune.
You bet. Months of work, tons of money. Finally, the firm comes up with this high-tech solution, a super sensitive scale that could detect empty boxes. Sounds impressive, right?
It does.
Except when the CEO goes to visit the factory, he sees this little table fan sitting by the conveyor belt. It's blowing the empty boxes off the belt and into a bin. Problem solved.
Wait, what? That's it.
Yep. Turns out a guy from the maintenance department came up with that solution. Simple, effective, and way cheaper than that fancy scale.
It reminds me of those life hack videos, you know? Sometimes the simplest solution is the best.
It's a good reminder to think outside the box and to value the insights of everyone, not just the experts.
You know, it's like that story about Google Maps. They used all these complex algorithms to figure out driving routes.
But the algorithms didn't always account for real-world things like traffic jams or construction.
So they started using data from actual drivers, like GPS tracking and feedback from people on the road, to make the maps more accurate.
It was that combination of high-tech and real-world experience that made Google Maps so successful.
It shows the importance of getting input from different sources, different perspectives.
Tripathi also talks about how observation is key in sports. Like, he uses the example of Sachin Tendulkar, that incredible Indian cricketer.
Okay, I've heard of it. He's like a legend, right?
Totally. So he had this amazing cover drive shot. People who studied his technique, like his footwork and grip, could learn to replicate it. But those who just watched the shot without really paying attention to the details struggled.
It's the difference between passive watching and active observation.
Exactly. When we actively observe, we're engaging with the information and we learn more effectively.
And that applies to anything, right?
Yeah.
Learning a new skill, analyzing data, even just trying to improve at something you already do.
Absolutely.
Okay, let's go back to communication for a minute, but this time let's talk about really tough situations.
Okay, I'm thinking of that story about Franklin D. Roosevelt, how he convinced Americans to support Britain during World War II.
Most Americans didn't want to get involved in another war after all the devastation of World War I. It was a really tough sell.
But Roosevelt knew that Nazi Germany was a serious threat, and he had to get people on board.
So he gave all those powerful speeches, right? Like the Arsenal of Democracy speech.
Exactly. He framed the issue in a way that made sense to people. He appealed to their logic and their emotions, and he ultimately convinced them to support the cause.
It makes you think about what's happening now with all the misinformation out there. It's hard to know what to believe.
It's a whole new world, right? We're constantly bombarded with information, and it can be hard to filter out the truth.
It's like we need a whole new set of skills to navigate this information overload.
We need to be critical thinkers, we need to be skeptical, and we need to be able to evaluate sources.
Okay, back to the book. Tripathy also talks about how purpose can be a powerful motivator for positive change. He tells this story about a small village in India that was struggling.
Yeah, their leader, the Sarpanch, wanted to invest in long-term development, but it meant asking people to pay taxes, which wasn't popular.
It's always easier to promise quick fixes.
Right, exactly. But he convinced the villagers to contribute towards building a check dam, which would help with water supply. It wasn't easy, but it worked.
And I bet it made a huge difference for the village.
It did. The check dam helped boost agricultural productivity, and then they used the tax revenue to build roads, a clinic, and a school. The whole village prospered.
Meanwhile, a neighboring village that focused on giving out freebies and cutting taxes ended up worse off in the long run.
It's a powerful example of how short-term thinking can backfire, while long-term investments can lead to real progress.
It's a good lesson for leaders everywhere.
Right.
Right? It's not always about making the popular choice. It's about making the right choice, even if it's tough.
Okay, one more story before we wrap up part 2. Remember that thing about fire and human evolution?
Yeah, I'm still curious about that one.
Tripathi uses it to show how deep diving can lead to unexpected insights. He argues that cooking food, made possible by fire, freed up a lot of energy that we used to spend chewing and digesting.
Okay, I'm following so far.
And he believes that all that extra energy went towards developing our brains. It's a fascinating theory about how a simple innovation, like cooking, could have such a profound impact on our evolution.
It really makes you think about all the things we take for granted, right?
It does. And it reminds us that there's always more to learn, more to discover if we're willing to dig a little deeper.
Welcome back, folks, to the final part of our deep dive into Manoj Tripathi's The Power of Ignored Skills.
I feel like we've already learned so much, but there's always more, isn't there? Oh, there's always more. And that's kind of the point of the book, right? To make us aware of these hidden powers we all have.
Speaking of hidden powers, you were talking about fire before the break.
Yeah.
I'm still kind of stuck on that one. Like, what does fire have to do with ignored skills?
It's a great example of how deep diving can lead to surprising insights. Tripathi argues that fire was a game changer for human evolution.
Okay, I remember you saying something about how cooking food freed up energy for our brains to develop. But I need you to break that down for me a little more.
Sure. Imagine our ancestors before fire. They're eating everything raw, which means they're spending a huge amount of time and energy just chewing and digesting.
I never really thought about it like that, but yeah, that makes sense.
But once they discovered fire and started cooking their food, it became much easier to digest. That freed up all this extra energy that could be used for other things.
And one of those things was brain development.
That's the theory. It's a fascinating example of how a simple innovation, something we totally take for granted today, could have had such a profound effect on who we are as a species.
So it's like this domino effect, right? One seemingly small thing can lead to all these huge changes over time.
Exactly. And that reminds me of another story from the book about the invention of Velcro.
Velcro. Come on. Everyone knows about Velcro. What's so deep about that?
Well, it started with a simple observation in nature. This Swiss engineer, George de Mistral, noticed those little burdock burrs that stick to your clothes and your dog's fur.
Okay, I've definitely had my fair share of those stuck to my socks after a hike.
Right. So de Mistral gets curious. He looks at the burrs under a microscope and discovers all these tiny hooks that allow them to latch onto fabric.
Ah, so that's where the idea for Velcro came from. It's like nature already figured it out.
Exactly. Of course, it took years of research and experimentation to create a synthetic version, but the inspiration came from that simple observation.
It's amazing how those little things, those things we often overlook, can spark such incredible innovations.
And speaking of innovations, Tripathi tells this fascinating story about the link between the British Armed Forces and the development of cell phones.
Wait, what? The military and cell phones? How are those connected?
It goes back to the 1960s. The British Ministry of Defense was looking for a replacement for those big, bulky cathode ray tubes they were using in military vehicles.
Okay, I can see why they'd want something smaller and more portable.
Exactly. So they started exploring liquid crystal displays, or LCDs, but early LCDs only worked at high temperatures, which wasn't practical for everyday use.
So not ideal for soldiers in the field, or anyone else for that matter.
Right. So they brought in a chemist to figure out a solution. His research led to the invention of a new molecule that allowed LCDs to function at room temperature.
And that's what made it possible to use LCDs in everything from TVs and computers to cell phones. It's crazy to think that something the military needed led to this huge technological revolution.
It just goes to show how innovation often comes from unexpected places. Sometimes a solution for one problem can unlock possibilities in a totally different field.
It's all about making those connections, seeing the bigger picture, and recognizing the potential ripple effects of our actions.
Exactly. Which brings us back to the importance of those ignored skills.
Right, so we've talked about observation, connecting the dots, communication, and now we've even touched on prediction. It's all starting to come together.
It is, isn't it? And I think that's the beauty of this book. It helps us see how these seemingly simple skills are actually interconnected and essential for navigating the complexities of life.
I'm curious, what was your biggest takeaway from The Power of Ignored Skills?
For me, it was the realization that these skills aren't just nice to haves, they're fundamental to success in any field. Whether you're a scientist, an artist, an entrepreneur, or just trying to live a more fulfilling life, these skills can help you achieve your goals and make a positive impact on the world.
I totally agree. This book has been a real eye-opener, and I highly recommend it to anyone who wants to unlock their full potential.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the power of ignored skills. We hope you've enjoyed it and learned something new along the way.
And remember, folks, these skills are within all of us. It's just a matter of recognizing their power and putting them into practice. Until next time, keep learning, keep exploring, and keep striving to be the best version of yourselves.